Well, there's so much to do today, but of course there's time now for the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, should Sir Keir Starmer be held accountable for the Post Office scandal? Because in the ongoing debate surrounding the scandal, questions have arisen about Sir Keir's accountability for cases prosecuted during his tenure as the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. Reports indicate that 11 sub-postmasters faced prosecution for fraud, theft and false accounting relating to the faulty Horizon IT system during Starmer's time at the CPI, or the CPS even, whilst 3 cases resulted in convictions. Starmer asserts that he was unaware of any of these proceedings, and the Labour leader has faced backlash from Conservative MP Greg Smith and Nigel Farage, stating that Starmer must acknowledge his role and potentially apologise for any harm caused by false prosecutions. Many suggest the leader of the Lib Dems, Ed Davey, should be held accountable. You know my thoughts. But who should be to blame for the Great British Debate this hour? I'm asking, should Sir Keir Starmer be held accountable for the Post Office scandal? So I'm joined now by Roger Keir, former advisor to the Bank of England, Stephen Pound, former Labour MP, Anne Widdecombe, former Conservative Minister, and James Price, Research Fellow at the Centre for Policy Studies. Right, well, I'm going to start with Anne Widdecombe. Anne.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, the heat should be on, not Keir Starmer, but Ed Davey. He was approached, he wrote back and refused a meeting, actually saying in terms it wouldn't serve any useful purpose. So there is a very direct connection between him and what was going on. I think the Keir Starmer case is more debatable, and I would want to hear more facts. I mean, if it really was only 11 people in the course of 5 years, he might not have noticed a pattern developing because the Post Office was prosecuting the vast majority, not the CPS. I don't know. I'd want to know a lot more before I pointed the finger at him, but I certainly point it very, very ferociously at Ed Davey, and I don't want that message diluted.
That's interesting you should say that. I did a little monologue earlier about that. Stephen Pound.
Yeah, good evening, Dan. Look, the reality is people came to Ed Davey, who was the minister in charge, who was actually running the ship then, and said, look, we've got a problem here. And he said no useful purpose would be served by us meeting. The situation with Keir Starmer is wholly and totally different. The Crown Prosecution Service prepares the case and then passes it through for prosecution. There's no way that Sir Keir Starmer could have picked up on every single case going through. You might as well say the Queen's responsible because it was done in the Queen's courts. Look, the reality is there's no shortage of scapegoats here. And we all know who the villains are. We all know where the blame lies. And I have to say, for the Tories to try to smear Keir Starmer in this way, it's simply risible. It doesn't make sense. He wasn't responsible for this. He may have been running, he may be in the DPP, but he wasn't running the public prosecutions completely. That was the CPS. So, look, I hate to be seen on national television to agree entirely with Anne Widdecombe, but on this occasion, please allow me to do so.
Right, let's go to Roger Keir. Roger.
Well, I think both of you have a point. There is a difference between the 2 cases. I think that Ed Davey's failure to meet and the fact that he was the Minister for Postal Affairs, the buck stops there. I mean, I just think it's so lame to say I was lied to, I didn't know. Well, you know, his job is to have, even if it's through his lieutenants and minions, the facts about cases so that they don't make mistakes. And I think to some extent, to differ with you both, I think Starmer is in a similar position because, you know, if you look at this from a legal point of view, the CPS was taking cases sent to it by the Post Office, an organization allowed to conduct private prosecutions where effectively bribes, commissions had been paid to ignore overwhelming evidence already well known, and it was handed to the CPS, and I guess they didn't investigate it very well. And if Starmer was running an organization that operated like that, then he's certainly got some blame to carry, whichever case wasn't properly investigated.
Well, weren't they on some sort of commission or something if they people were prosecuted? Or
Well,
something?
I mean,
some sort of favouritism.
Yeah.
Let's get James.
Sorry.
Get James on. James.
Yeah, well, I mean, Adam Smith said there's plenty of ruin in a nation, and in this case, there's plenty of blame to go around. I think 4 for 4 out of all of us thinking that Ed Davey really is in a bad way here on this. I've seen lots of those sorts of letters before when I served in government, officials and civil servants would come up to you and say, listen, you don't need to worry about this. It's no problem at all. And the people that say that are the people who've got no skin in the game. They're never going to get fired. They're never going to get in trouble. It's a big problem with the way that a lot of the public sector works, I'm afraid. It's always the scapegoat at the top who gets in trouble, and Ed Davey, this might get him yet. But similarly, I think for Sir Keir, there's a bit of problem here because he's happy to play on his record as Director of Public Prosecutions. He's happy to take the credit for all the good things. And then to some extent, you have to then take the criticism when things go wrong. And that's some of the problems that happen with the Jimmy Savile failure of prosecution that happened there. Again, no one was saying that he personally failed to do this, but if he's going to take the credit for good things that an organisation he runs, he gets the blame for the bad things as well.
Well, Anne, what would you say to that? Because that's a good point.
I mean, it's perfectly fair to say that, the buck stops on the desk of the head of the organisation. But I'm just being realistic. I want to know how many cases there were that passed through. If there were seriously only 11 in 5 years, it wouldn't necessarily have focused his attention. But I'll tell you what does worry me, and that's this. The knowledge of what was going on was actually growing outside. People were becoming aware of this. It was getting coverage. And at that point, you would think that the CPS would say, well, hang on, is this one of these cases where there's some doubt? No, it's not down to the CPS to investigate the technology. It's down to the CPS to say, is there a realistic prospect of conviction? I'm afraid that's all they ever ask. But I think at the stage where everybody knew that there were question marks being raised, yes. I mean, I think it's reasonable to say Keir Starmer should, at that stage, have perhaps asked questions. But I would need to know the facts. We do know the facts about Ed Davey. And I'm sorry, it's no good hiding behind the civil servants. I was a minister for 7 years. I couldn't hide behind my civil servants and say, oh dear, they told me it was all right.
Well,
it was my duty to ask, but is it really all right? And Ed Davey didn't do that, clearly.
No. Well, listen, I'm running out of time, and I've got to read the right to reply from Sir Keir Starmer. So, Roger Kibble, thank you very much, former advisor to the Bank of England, Stephen Pound, former Labour MP, Anne Widdecombe, former Conservative Minister, and James Price, Research Fellow. Now, a spokesperson for Sir Keir Starmer had this to say about his time at the CPS in relation to the Post Office scandal. During Keir's time as Chief Prosecutor, no cases relating to Horizon were brought to his desk. The scandal that has emerged is one of the worst miscarriages of justice in British history, and Labour has been calling for swift exoneration and compensation for the victims. It's vital that all action is taken to right these wrongs. Labour's focus is on playing our part in making sure this injustice is never repeated.